Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Let Fear Bounce. I am Kim Lengling, your host, and I am so glad that you're spending just a small part of your day with myself today and my special guest, Julie Brill. She is an author coming to us from the East Coast, folks. She's been collecting family stories since she was a little girl. She's a lactation consultant, childbirth educator, doula. Ooh, and the author of anthology Round the Circle, Doulas Share Their Experiences. She's got a new book coming out in a very short time, folks. You're going to have to keep your eyes out for that, called Hidden in Plain Sight. It is the untold chapter of Holocaust history. And we're going to dive into that to find out exactly what that untold chapter is. Julie, welcome to Let Fear Bounce.
Thank you so much, Kim. I'm so happy to be here.
Now, we had like quite a fun little chat before I hit the record button. So I always love meeting other authors and finding out what makes them tick and why they decided to write what they wrote or what they're in the midst of writing. But you've got an anthology out. So share a little bit about your anthology before we dive into the book that's coming up.
Sure, I'd love to do that. The anthology is called Round the Circle. It's almost 10 years now that it's been out. And I wrote it with 22 other doulas. We really wanted to give folks who were new doulas or thinking about being a doula or maybe burned out as a doula, what we had learned the hard way. So
Now,
it's
can
called
I
Round
can
the
I interrupt
Circle.
for just
Yeah,
a
of
second?
course.
Share with the listeners what a doula is.
Yes, we should start with that.
Yeah.
So, a doula is somebody who supports another person during childbirth, during the childbearing year. So, starting in pregnancy through labor and birth, and then into postpartum. And some doulas specialize really in the labor part, some do postpartum, some do both. It was a new concept when I started in the 90s, like really we were spelling it Doula, people didn't know what it was. Now it's like I feel like it's kind of having a moment, like you see it on sitcoms and people have more of an idea. So it's been fun to watch the awareness grow over the years.
So is doula like a midwife?
Yes and no. So doulas are emotional and physical support. Midwives do that too, but they also are actually responsible for the labor and the birth. So it's midwives are more. Doulas are able to focus just on what the family needs emotionally and physically and provide information.
Awesome. See, I didn't know
Yeah.
that. I learned something new today.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
I'm
I,
probably the
I just
only
like the word doula.
Me too. Me too. It's Greek. I'm probably the only person who ever wrote a doula anthology and followed it up with a Holocaust memoir. It's like the biggest leap I think probably you could make. It's yeah.
Right. Quite a diverse.
Yes, yes. Who knows where I will go next?
Right. Maybe it'll be a children's book.
Sure, why not? A graphic novel.
Yeah. Or a horror not, whatever. Wow. Yeah, yeah, you're right. So you and 22 others
Yes,
created
we
this
got together.
anthology.
Yep, it's called Round the Circle because it's that idea of sitting in a circle, like non-hierarchical, sharing with each other. It's how I learned in the early 90s when I was getting started. I was in midwifery school and it was like that way, very egalitarian, very feminist. And I wanted that idea. I asked a whole lot of people who I knew, some well, some barely, if they would write for this book, and 22 people said yes. So it was a really fun project, getting that out in the world.
Now, see, I too coordinate anthologies. I've coordinated and published five
Yeah,
and working on the sixth. The last three,
amazing.
the last two, including the one that's just beginning now, is all about pets.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we were talking about
Paw
our
prints on
pets.
paw prints. It's a paw print called Paw Print series.
I want to look at that. We were talking about our pets before we started recording. I mean,
Yes,
right? That
yes,
special place in your heart.
indeed. And if you have a pet, I think we all do.
Yes. Yeah.
They fill a spot that you didn't realize needed filling.
Yeah. Well, I have a golden retriever and she makes eye contact in this way that like it's the way we do it with our babies. It like just taps on that oxytocin response. I would do anything for her.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
that's how again, we were talking off mic, but other folks that have listened, if anyone's listened to this show before, they've heard me mention Digger, my dog from a few years ago that I had for 14 years. I would often mention that, looking into his eyes, I'd be like, there is so much more than a dog in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was almost human-like, and the way he understood, it was just amazing.
It,
And the dog I now have now, Dexter, I love him dearly, but a lot of times when you look at him, you're like, well, you're just a dog.
yeah, I get that.
But that's okay because he's
Yeah.
exactly what he's meant to be.
Yeah. Imagine
He's
if they were
super
all the
smart,
same.
super smart.
Yeah.
Just, and each dog is different.
Yeah, totally.
Each dog is different. Okay, back to the doulas. Like how my conversations go. Back to the doulas. What made you want to be, and I know you just briefly mentioned that, but wait, what made you even look at, doula, think I want to be one?
Yeah, I was very lucky when I was in college to get this is like pre-internet to get hooked up with the midwifery community. And I just thought, I mean, naively, I was young, like I want to be a part of that world. That is the most beautiful, happiest moment in life. Of course, now I understand for many people it's stressful and difficult and all of that, but I wanted to like put myself there in that moment of beginnings. And I just it's so romantic, that idea that I had. But it was like just joy and happiness and rainbows, and that's where I wanted to go. And a lot of people say this, but I feel like it was really a calling, like I was supposed to be doing that work.
And I think if something like that, if you're pulled into a job, and I don't even want to call it a job, like you said, it's a calling. If you feel pulled in that direction, you absolutely should do it. If it's your passion and your calling. And I think we all have a calling, but a lot of times I think societal norm,
Yeah,
there is such a
yeah,
thing, pulls people's eyes away from their passion.
right.
It's
I
like, no,
agree with
you
that.
can't do that. You have to do this because that's a real job.
Right. I mean, we
And
need
you
to go
need you
back
need
to,
this. Yeah.
yeah, what we thought we wanted to do when we were little kids, like I wanted to be a mom, I wanted to work with babies, I wanted to be a writer. Like I think your 5-year-old self knows what you wanted to do.
And that's interesting that you said your 5-year-old self, because years ago, I was talking to a counselor and she had said something along the lines of, well, what would you tell your 5-year-old self?
Right.
And I did that as a practice, and that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do.
Yeah.
And I wrote it out in story form, me talking to my 5-year-old self. And then I did
Yeah.
it again, me talking to my 18-year-old self.
Yeah.
And it was just as hard both times because hindsight, you see what you've gone through and how incredibly hard stuff was. And you try and tell your younger self, oh my gosh, it's going to hurt so bad. And it's going to be so hard. And you're
Yeah.
not going to know what to do. And it's going to become so dark, but you make it. And I had put out just like a call to authors and just said, hey, I'm doing a contest. No reason, just contest. I want you to write a 500-word letter to your 5-year-old self. And I had so many, and it was interesting because it was all women.
Yeah.
So many folks that came forth and did that. And I turned it into a little contest and they got a little, digital award, first, second, third place. But those stories were so heart-wrenching,
Yeah.
every one of them. So, what would you say to your 5-year-old self?
Um, and when you said that, like I felt that in my stomach. I would really have to kind of sit and think, what I
Yeah,
would
you feel it
want
in your
to
stomach.
say
I
to
know you
her.
get that feeling.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. I don't have an answer off the top of my, I'm gonna think about it. I feel like I want to write her a letter like with a piece of paper and a pen.
And I was just going to say, when I did it, I hand wrote it
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I felt that's what I needed to do.
Yeah.
Because it releases for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
doing it that way, you know, releases something and saying it out loud. Then, that's what my practice was, handwrite it and then read it out loud.
Yeah. That's very
Ooh,
powerful.
wee, powerful
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff. Okay, so talking of powerful stuff and stuff that makes your stomach sink, hidden in plain sight. Now, wow, what a journey! What a journey you went through to create this book. This involves your family, your father and
Yes.
his parents, correct?
Yes.
During the Holocaust in Serbia.
Yes.
And I honestly, we were talking off mic. I said, when I first saw that, I literally went, my head tilted and went, Serbia.
Right.
And that was just my own ignorance because I was never taught that about Serbia and the Holocaust. Right? It was all, Germany.
Right.
And
That's
that's
why I
just,
wrote the book. No one is taught that.
and I'm so glad that you did. Truly, I am so, so glad that you did. So it's called Hidden in Plain Sight. and it is not released yet, folks, but it's coming.
Yes.
It's releasing
Yes.
soon. When is it releasing?
It comes out April 23rd. This is the cover on the
Oh,
Kindle.
beautiful.
Yes.
April
Yeah.
23rd, folks. Mark your books. Seriously. Or, yeah, mark your books, mark your calendars.
You can order it now. It's available for pre-order.
Oh, pre order on Amazon?
All the places,
All the
Amazon,
places.
Bookshop, Barnes and Noble. I went onto my local independent bookstore website and saw it there, so you can get it anywhere.
Oh, how awesome. Now,
Yeah,
is this a self-published work or did you go
no,
traditional publishing?
it's through a publisher called Amsterdam Publishing. They're based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and their focus is on Holocaust books.
I've heard of them before.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
I
had
think you
another,
had
I had
another
an,
Audrey
I was going
Birnbaum.
to say I had
Yes,
another.
yes,
That's why I
right.
heard
We're
of it
with the
because they
same
published
house.
her book,
That's right.
The Wolf or something.
Yes, American Wolf.
American Wolf. Look at how this is all coming together.
See?
I am
Yeah,
so glad that I'm able to provide a platform that you ladies can share this.
me too.
Seriously,
Thank
this
you
is, I
so
mean, and
much.
honestly, it's an honor because learning stuff about we need to know this history. We as in a collective whole to not repeat. And though you look at the world today and it's repeating over and over and over again.
That's right. That's right.
And it makes you wonder, humanity makes you
Right.
wonder. And it's like, why haven't you learned your lesson? Why
Right.
haven't we as human beings learned our lesson that this is not the way? It's not the way it should be. I'm going to jump off my little soapbox. And I would like you to share how you got on this journey. Now, in your bio, it says that you collected stories and shared stories since you were a little girl. So,
Yes.
how was it that you said, well, first off, how did you find out? How were you told, whatever the case may have been, that your dad and his parents went through this?
Yeah. So, my father was always very open with stories. Some survivors are not. My father always shared, and the stories that he told were from a child's perspective. So, the German bombing of Belgrade, where he lived, was his earliest memory. He wasn't quite 3. He remembers moments in time the way young children remember things.
Right.
And so I had these memories that my father told me. And I could not understand how they fit into this broader Holocaust story because, like you, I learned about Germany and Anne Frank, in
Right.
Holland and some things in Poland, and we never learned about anything east of there. And the stories are very different. The Holocaust in Serbia came very fast. It was basically all over by the spring of 1942. I mean, the US didn't even get into the war until December 41. And there were no cattle cars, there were no gas chambers. My grandfather was held in a camp in the center of the city. So I was always trying to figure out how my father's stories fit into the historical record. And it's that journey that I wrote about. And I really wrote about it because no one else had. I kept thinking, if someone else comes out with a book on the Holocaust on Serbia, I'll just rest. But it's really an untold story. That was my motivation to tell the story.
And can you share a little bit about it without giving, away the entire book, but can you share a little bit of your journey while you were researching and while you were researching and pulling that book together, what is it that you personally felt? Because this is, I mean, these are, your direct family members.
Yeah, I mean, I write about it in the book. I felt all the emotions and sometimes no emotion, just numbness. But there was a sense of satisfaction. Everything my father said was true, and it fit into the historical record once I could see it. So it was like this Goldilocks moment. My father was still sharing stories with me, and I could ask him questions. My kids were grown, so I had the time to focus. I had the internet, and there are more and more records that are coming online all the time. So I always sort of thought as history is like this static thing, but the history is evolving. So I was able to access records, for my family that I would not have been even 5 years earlier. So it was really this moment when I could, get everything together. And then my father and I went 3 times to Belgrade, which for him was really like returning. It was a homecoming.
Right.
Belgrade is his hometown, and I was able to see him in his hometown, and we met family we hadn't even known existed. And memory is really triggered by being in the place. So he stood on the street outside our hotel and he had a memory I had never heard before. And I share that all in the book.
How powerful and
It
and life altering.
Yes, yes. I feel like I've finally started to understand what happened to my father now, myself, of course, because our stories begin before we're born. So, oh, this is, who I am and why I am that way. Had more to be able to pass on to my kids. I have two grown daughters, and each of them came on some of those trips and really got to see, where we're from.
What an amazing thing. I mean, so incredibly powerful. And I think that word doesn't even cover it, really. To be standing right where so much happened
Yes,
that
yes.
that you can only use your imagination and your father's words and maybe some of the research, but you bring that all together and you get this visual picture in your head. What was it like the first time that may have happened to you as you were actually there in Belgrade? Did you have like an I don't even know if epiphany is the right word, but did you have a moment where it just all just went clicked and you were just like, oh, and took your breath away?
Many, many moments like that. I remember we flew from London, so it's my father and my daughter and me, and we're in the boarding area. We're going to fly to Belgrade, and my daughter and I are just taking pictures of it because Belgrade had been like Oz. It was like a place you couldn't get to. I mean, there was communism, there was a language barrier, there was distance and, the cost of going, there were the Balkan Wars, there were all these barriers, and now we're actually going to this place. And it sounds ridiculous because, of course, it's a capital city, and of course, it has an airport and you can fly there. But my childhood self just couldn't believe that we were going there. It seemed unbelievable. And I remember one day we were in the Jewish cemetery looking at my father's grandmother's buried there, his great grandfather, his great grandmother, and just that sense of, oh, like we are from here. I live in New England, and there's a saying, it's really a Vermont saying. Um, in order to be a Vermonter, you need to have four grandparents in the ground, right? You're not really from Vermont unless you go
Yeah.
generations back. And
Yep.
I'm from nowhere by that definition. But my father is from Belgrade, and we're standing in the cemetery, and I imagined, we're standing at his grandmother's grave, like, his father, my grandfather must have stood there. There was a ceremony, with a burial, and they were all stood where we're standing. It was really
Wow.
phenomenal for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Whew,
Yeah.
that's something. I had my great grandparents um came from Poland.
Yeah.
Um Poland before that chunk of Poland was is now Germany.
Yes. Yeah, the
Um,
borders are always shifting in that
and
area.
yes, yes, and during World War II, they certainly did. Um, but I remember years ago, my aunt had shared something several years after my grandmother had passed, and because if you got four grandparents in the ground, like you said, I'm from nowhere too,
Right,
you
right.
know, because I only have two, but
Yeah,
they're from Poland, and I did one of those DNA tests
yeah.
and sent it in just because I was like, well, this will be interesting to find out because I've always been told I was Polish on my dad's side and Scotch Irish on my mom's side. And turns out I have a little bit of Jewish in me.
Interesting.
And it was very interesting. And
Yeah,
so I went, oh, well, I want to see if I can find anything in Poland.
yeah.
And there's nothing left
Right,
of my family over there.
right. I mean, that's the story of the Polish Jews and so
And
many of these communities in
and when
Europe.
I realized, because I was like, I was getting so frustrated, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, there's got to be somebody. I mean, they came from here, and they did, and there's got to be descendants somewhere. And then it was like this. It was like someone slapped me. That's how it felt, and I was like, and it took my breath away, and I went, there is no one there,
Right,
and I was so shook up over that. And this is decades and decades, just like that's why I'm trying to put my experience somewhat comparable, trying to feel what you felt, while you stood in Belgrade with
right,
your father. So I can understand a little that take your breath away, stomach sinks feeling. Because it was just, you're thinking, oh, it was just, I can't even find the words for it actually.
Yeah, yeah, it's so shocking. I mean, my father was born in 1938 in Belgrade, in Dorchel, which was the Jewish neighborhood. His family had been there for a long time. The Jewish community had been there since before the Serbs. There was no idea in 1938 that it was almost over. There was no way to know, you're saying what to say to your 5-year-old self, but like it's like the view of what's going to happen in just a few years that there could be, no one could envision it. I mean, no sane
No.
person could imagine what was
Now,
happening.
explain to folks that are listening, because interestingly enough, the majority of my listeners are under 40.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I find it interesting every day.
Yeah.
But, I think it's cool because they're learning something every time they listen in. So, explain to folks where Serbia is.
Yes. So Serbia is in the Balkans. So Eastern Europe, east of Italy, if you picture the boot on the map, it's east of there, was part of Yugoslavia, in the time period that we're talking about during World War II. Although in the German occupation, Germany actually redivided it. So Serbia became its own separate area again for the duration of the war, then back to Yugoslavia again. And then, of course, in the 90s with the Balkan Wars,
Mhm.
everybody went back to where they had been before. The countries all split apart.
So, were Jewish folks like the prominent folks in Belgrade, or was it just a city? It was just a city in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, it was a major city. It was capital city. It was capital of Serbia and then the capital of Yugoslavia. There was never a gigantic Jewish community, but there was a well-established Jewish community. One of the things I learned, we think about ghettos, that word was originally the Jewish quarter of an Italian city with a gate, and the Jews had to be in by sunset and all that. Um, the area that we're talking about was Muslim, was part of the Ottoman Empire. And so there was neighborhoods, but there were never gates, there were never restrictions. And there was, by the time we're talking about, quite a bit of integration. So my grandfather, was Jewish, but he considered himself a Serb first and then a Jew.
Okay.
He knew all kinds of people who were, Catholic and Serbian Orthodox and Muslim. It was a very integrated community.
And the
Um,
Germans just came?
The Germans just came.
I
Yeah.
mean,
So, um,
it's so hard. It's still all these years later, it's so hard for me to wrap my head around. Like they just came into this city that was integrated with all kinds of other people, and religious beliefs and what have you. They just said, we're going to come and wipe the Jews out.
yeah. So, I mean, the history is actually really interesting that it was a kingdom. The king of Yugoslavia at the time made a pact with Germany, he was like a non-aggression pact, trying to avoid a war. And the Yugoslavs, particularly the Serbs, wanted no part of that. So
Mm,
they didn't go to work. They stood on the street. They protested, and they got rid of the king. He was actually holding the space for the young king, the heir to the throne. They put the young king in, who refused to go along with the pack, and Hitler got very, very angry. So his eye was not on Yugoslavia, it was on the Soviet Union, but he diverted to go teach them a lesson. And that's the bombing that my father remembers, the April 1941 bombing of the Germans bombing the city.
fascinating.
Yeah.
See, I didn't know any of
We
that.
did not learn that in world history.
Well,
Yeah.
a lot of stuff didn't even wasn't even taught that the Russians were a big part of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't recall I don't recall learning that in school either.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
the Russians played a huge part.
Right.
Huge part.
Right.
Wow, fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. So, how long did it take you to write the book?
So it's a hard question to answer. I feel like in some ways, always. I was collecting
Yeah, your whole
stories as
life,
that
yes.
5-year-old girl, but 2017 is when I really marked it. So 2017, my younger daughter goes to college. I have an empty nest. I have time. I'm doing the research. I'm writing people. I'm pulling documents. I'm translating them painfully on Google Translate one word at a
Yeah.
time out of these handwritten documents, trying to learn the Cyrillic alphabet. I mean, craziness. And that's next year, 2018, we go to Belgrade, my dad and my daughter and I. So that really is the beginning of it.
What an amazing journey.
Yeah.
What an
Yeah.
amazing, and your father's still with us.
My father is alive and well and excited for the book to come out and wanting to, give his friends copies. And, it's very interesting. He was always forthcoming with the story, but it was always like, ask me a question and he would answer it. It's not like, doesn't want to burden anybody, but, he's very much a part of this process. Of course, I couldn't have written it if hadn't been able to ask him, really, did this happen? And what do you remember?
So how did he get to America?
They survived the war in Belgrade. My grandmother, my father, and by that point, my aunt, his younger sister, was born. My grandfather was murdered, sadly. And in 1948, they go to Israel. So my grandmother just, she turned her back on Europe. She didn't want anything more to do with everything that had happened there. And she also very much believed, I believe, that my grandfather was still alive and that she would find him there, that they would be reunited, because she never had the piece of an answer. And that's part of what I was able to uncover. The documents are there now. We can access them, of what happened to him, things that my grandmother never knew about. And I write about that in the book.
And so did your grandmother pass away while living in Israel?
She did. She did. I never got to meet her. I mean, I just know her through pictures and through what my father told me. I think she really died of a broken heart. You know, she
So
was
then
the
how
love of
did your
her
brother,
life.
your brother, I'm sorry, how did your father and your aunt get to America?
So my aunt is still in Israel. My father came here to Boston to go to school.
Oh, okay.
He was 26 years old. He thought he would go to college here, and then go back. And I mean, it's a love story. He met my mother who lived here, and they got married, and they stayed here, and I was born here, and my brother. So
What an amazing history.
yeah,
I mean, goodness gracious. So what's next then? I know
yeah.
you've got this anticipation of this amazing book that's soon to be released, but any author I've ever talked to always has something else in the back. So do you have something else hanging out on the back burner that,
I mean, it's
has, is,
interesting.
has been
Yeah.
picking at your brain?
Yeah, I mean, this book is still very much what is front and center. I'm,
Oh, absolutely.
marketing this book, and I wrote this story because I wanted people to know what happened to the Jews of Serbia. And so, um, I'm marketing and I'm talking about it and I'm writing about it. And I don't know what will be next. Apparently, it takes me 10 years to write a book,
Yeah.
so I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's so much energy. I mean, everybody says that, but there's just so many parts
Well, and
to it.
especially when you're doing a book like you have written, there's a tremendous amount of research
And I
and
very much,
emotional.
yeah.
There's a
Yep.
lot of emotional stuff you have to go through.
Very emotional. I wanted to be as accurate as I possibly could. There are things that I don't know yet and probably will never know. And I'm very upfront in the book when I'm like, this could have happened, or maybe this, we just don't know. But I felt like I owed it to the memory of the people in the story to get it right. Because otherwise you're just writing fiction, and that wasn't fiction is
Right.
wonderful, wasn't my
Right.
plan. I really wanted to tell the true story of what had happened.
And how amazing that your aunt and your father made it through the
It's
war.
it's impossible to understand. I mean, the reason I wrote the book, was this is the cover. If people are seeing it on YouTube, it's a picture of two children. They're my father, who's about 6, and my aunt, who's a little over a year. They're standing on the street. And I only had 4 pictures growing up of my father's childhood. This was one of them. And I would look at this picture and try to make sense of it, right?
Yes.
So this is the spring of 42.
Mhm.
After they had declared, Belgrade was one of the first cities to be Judenfrei, which is free of Jews. There's supposed to be no more Jews alive in the city, and mostly they weren't. And somehow these two young Jewish children, my father and my aunt, are not just alive, but they are standing on the street. So how is that possible? And that's really the question that I answer in the book, trying to,
Yeah, so
how
don't
could
share that
this,
now then.
no, no, I'm keeping it a secret, but no spoilers, but how could it happen? And recently somebody told me, Julie, cameras were illegal in occupied Europe. You couldn't, I mean, it's not like now where everybody has a camera on their phone, but
Right.
you could not own a camera. If you owned a camera, you had to turn it into the German authorities, and you definitely were not taking pictures on the street because there could have been military. You could have been giving away
Right.
some secret. So how does this picture exist?
Right. And even to, even if you had a camera, but then you had to develop them.
Hmm.
And
Right.
that's not anything close like today. So you had to have a place with all these chemicals and all kinds of stuff.
Yes. Yes. I mean, my grandmother, again, I didn't get to meet her, but she was an amazing woman. And she wanted this picture and she got this picture. And I think she got it, from my grandfather. She believed that he was alive and they were going to be reunited and she would have this picture for him.
Wow. Four pictures, you said.
Yes.
You know
Yeah.
what's interesting? From that time frame, a friend of mine wrote a book about his uncle who perished during World War II. And the name of his book is Four Pictures and a Middle Name
Oh, wow.
because all he has is four pictures.
Yes.
I'm like,
Yeah.
four?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Yeah. I mean, very
You're
interesting.
the
And I
second
remember,
person that I've talked to about that time frame in history
yeah.
and only has four pictures.
Yeah, and they were each like, I mean, I know them like the back of my hand. We didn't have them on the wall. They were like in an envelope in some drawer and they would surface. My mother would be cleaning and we would find them and we would look at them. I mean, kids don't even know what this is because everything's on the phone. You had to hold the edges of it. One was my grandparents' wedding picture. One was a picture of my grandfather holding my father as a baby. One was this picture of my grandmother with my father on a park bench and this picture. And I just like look at their faces like, do they look like me? Who are they? They don't know what's going to happen. I know what's
Right,
going to
right.
happen.
You're waiting for
You
the
know,
picture to speak to you.
you feel like it could, like, is there some detail that I can harvest that I haven't seen before? you
Yes,
know and
yes,
looking at them as kids and identifying with my father as a kid and then identifying with my grandparents. I mean, my grandparents are young in those pictures now, of course, like I could be their parent. I'm
right.
so much older than they are in those images.
And that, that's another thing I've often thought, when you have folks, a survivor of any traumatic event or time in history or what have you, when you surpass the age of what your ancestor lived to
Yes.
be,
Yeah.
what a feeling that is,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. I mean,
Wow. Oh my goodness. Felt all the feels during this conversation, Julie.
yeah, so good to
Wow.
talk to
I
you,
am
Kim.
really looking forward to this book coming out.
Me
I'm going
too.
to get
It's
myself a copy of it and
oh, great.
I will gladly read it and leave a
Yes.
review.
Yes, I would
Um,
love that.
wow. Wow. What a conversation. Oh, see, now I'm intrigued. I might have to do some research on my own just to learn more because that's
Yeah,
how my brain works.
I hope that people will learn more, I mean, about this story, the Serbian story that's unknown, but also everybody's got stories in their family. Go
Right.
find out your stories while you can.
Yes. Well, you can go find out your stories and talk to those folks that are still with you that might have a bit of that history that will go away when they're no longer here.
Yeah, record it,
Talk to them. Talk to them.
record it. Ask them specific questions, details, ask them the
Yes.
questions you haven't asked before, ask it in a different way. Memory is interesting. There's often more you can harvest that you don't know
Oh
yet.
yeah. Emotional memory.
Yeah,
Bam. I so often I look back, I'm like, oh, I wish I would have asked my grandmother more questions. I had one grandmother who would probably answer all of them. My other grandmother, nope.
yeah,
We don't talk about that.
right,
That was what I would get because I did ask questions when I was a teenager.
right,
And we don't need to talk about any of that stuff.
right.
And it was very harsh and very direct and to the point. I was like, okay. And then when I got in my 30s, I started asking again. And it was the same answer, only gentler.
Interesting.
And it would be like, Kimmy, we really just don't talk about that time.
Yeah. So she was softening as she aged?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I never could find out a lot of what I would have liked to, because my brain has always been, since I was young, just like you, very curious. And I was told no so often when
Yeah.
I would ask questions as a young person, probably hurtful questions, but I didn't know any better. You know, bringing up stuff that they didn't want to think about or remember.
Right.
But then as you age, you're like, no, I really do want to know because that's a part of me too.
Right. And maybe those answers are somewhere else. I mean, we found out things from family we didn't know we had. We found pictures we didn't know existed. We found documents. So, I mean, those stories might still be there for you, Kim.
Well, they might be. It was interesting after my grandmother passed, a friend of hers, I never knew that she was married in a double wedding with her best friend. I
Yeah.
never knew this because grandma
Yeah.
never talked about it. But this woman who was very elderly by the time she passed away, um, it was a year or two before she passed away. I got an envelope filled with black and white and sepia toned pictures
Wow.
of the day of the double wedding
Yeah.
of my grandmother and my grandfather who I'd never met.
They must look so young.
And I was, like you had said, looking at the picture and just trying to soak in every detail. And I still have those, and they're curled up, and you have to be very gentle when you're looking at them
Yeah.
and holding
Yeah.
them. Like when you said hold them at the edges, I knew exactly
Right.
what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff, fascinating, and then you look at that's just, oh, I think so often now there's certain generations that just don't care about what came before.
Yeah.
They're
And it's
too
very,
they're
it's,
too
there's,
focused on now and what I want and what I can get.
and also it's just by personality or something. I don't know. I was able to connect with people in my family who are very interested in this, and other people, it's fine,
Yeah.
aren't. I mean, there's something, people are cut differently from a
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
cloth that makes you want to know, or you don't
I agree.
care.
I think
Yeah.
it's the empathy.
Yeah.
And not everybody is I think everybody has a bit of empathy and hopefully they all have compassion. I know I'm like ridiculously empathetic, way more than a lot of people that I know.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you might be kind of the same.
I feel that way too. It's why I do the work I do. Sometimes
Oh
I
yeah, and
try to
being a
turn,
doula, of course,
yeah.
yeah.
Sometimes I try to turn it off. It's like it can be very exhausting. But
Yes,
also, it's a gift.
it is. And it took me a long time to realize that. And once I did, I went, okay, now I know better how to carry it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Wow. Well, we went a little longer than normal, but I don't care. This has been a fascinating conversation.
I really
Um,
enjoyed it too.
so, as we get ready to wrap up, share with folks where they can find you, all your good stuff. And of course, please share where the book will be and when it's coming out.
Yeah, great. So my name is Julie Brill. My website is just juliebrill.com. The book is Hidden in Plain Sight, a family memoir and the untold story of the Holocaust in Serbia. If you go to juliebrill.com, you'll have all the links of where to buy it and more information about it. It comes out April 23rd. Yeah.
So exciting. So exciting. Oh, my goodness. Well, I ask all of my guests to please toss out a nugget of hope at the end of
Yes.
each episode.
Yes.
So, what would your nugget of hope for the listeners be today?
So I know that because of course I listened to other episodes and have been thinking, and I it's like inch by inch, bite by bite, like a piece at a time. I think of like the quilting metaphor, like you take a little piece of fabric and you add another little piece of fabric. That's how I wrote the book, and it's how I've done anything, just like one little bit at a time. Can you do 5 minutes on the project that you care about? Can you do 5 minutes tomorrow on this, goal that you have? What is it? Chase your dreams, they won't chase you back. Like just little tiny steps in where you want to go is really the way you get there, I think, and the consistency of it.
Consistency of it. I
Yeah.
go, and if my
Yeah.
journey is at a turtle pace, it's my journey and I'm still moving forward.
Right. Right. I
And
mean,
so
a
when you,
hundred
as you were
words,
saying, inch by inch and bite by bite, inside I was just like,
I
yay.
mean, 100 words a day is a book in a year. Just keep going.
And no matter what it is that you're doing in life or what you're going through, that's the way I look at it. Because
Yeah.
a lot of people are going through some pretty darn heavy stuff right now.
Yes, yes,
Big, big life altering things.
for sure.
And you know what? It might be minute by minute or inch by inch, like you were saying. Sometimes your days go hour by hour, but at the end of the day, if you're still standing, holy cow, you made it.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And
you're
that's
awesome.
that's the other piece of it, right? Like rest. Like just do a little piece and rest.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. Make sure you rest and breathe. That's what I'm always saying. You got to
yeah,
breathe in with the
yeah,
good, out with the bad.
yeah.
Got to breathe because, no one ever told us that this life was going to be an easy ride.
Right, right.
So, buckle up, buttercup. Well, Julie, thank you once again for being my guest. I would love to have you back on after your book is out. So maybe sometime later this year, I would love to have you back on and chit chat more about the book. And how it's doing and
I
any
would love that.
feedback and
Yeah,
response that you've got, because you never know where this might take,
it
you
definitely
know.
feels that way. It's been an adventure. I'd love to
Yeah.
come back and update you.
How awesome. Yeah, I would love that. Would love that. Thank you once again for being my guest. It's been a true blessing.
Thanks, Kim.
Everybody out there, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Let Fear Bounce. Don't forget to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, because that helps us reach even more folks with all these amazing stories. So please subscribe, like, share, do all the things. This is Kim Lengling, your host of Let Fear Bounce. Everybody be well, stay well, and above all, be blessed. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of Let Fear Bounce. Your time is precious, and I am so grateful that you chose to spend just a small part of it with myself and my guest today. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss our weekly nuggets of hope and inspiration. And remember, folks, let fear bounce, because you've got this. So until next time, folks, keep your light shining bright.